On this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast, I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming a masterful storyteller, as he has been described. He has an MBA. He's collaborated with giants in the commercial world from Facebook, Microsoft, and others. But that's not all. This is somebody who really understands the topic that we are here to discuss today, and that is the sensitive but full of opportunity topic of privilege. So, Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Neil. I really appreciate it. And yeah, let's have some fun. Let's chit chat it up. Let's see what happens, man.
Well, this is one of those conversations where I don't know where it's going to go. And that for me is always the best start of a conversation. I mean, who can tell? I mean, I got some ideas and I think it possibly is going to go quite deep, but this is an important thing for people to reflect on, isn't it? There's so much stuff going on in the world today. I mean, gratitude, mindfulness, privilege, it's in that kind of higher kind of tier of things that are going to potentially solve a lot of the world's problems right now.
I do agree. So, like, when you're thinking about mindfulness and being very aware of who you are and the things that you're around you, this idea of privilege really does fit very nicely into that space. At least, at least the portion of it of understanding and being aware of how it impacts the things that are around you. The solutions that you come up with still, I guess, touch mindfulness, but I think it really grounds itself in like finding out how privilege impacts your life on a day-to-day basis. So what I mean by that is this. So everything that we do, every interaction that we have, the way that we're brought up, the way that we have, the way that we carry ourselves, all these things connect to some sort of privilege that we have. It could be a big privilege like I have $1 billion, which is what most people think about, and it could be a soft privilege as small as like my parents are still together. Like that's a privilege that you might not think about on a day-to-day basis, but it has impacted your life to some degree. And so talking and thinking about how privilege intersects with all that is not only fun, but it is very grounding. It's very humbling to just be able to say there's all these things that have impacted my life and brought me to this one moment. This one moment with Neil. All these things have built me to this point. And they're still active now, and it's my responsibility then to share them with the world in the most effective way possible.
So is this different then to, I mean, I bundled the word gratitude in with this, and I guess
Yeah.
it kind of, it's connected, but it possibly comes from a subtly different place. I mean, what we're talking about just, I guess, this beautiful blend of self-awareness and actually what that means that we have to offer in terms of value and kind of working from a higher place even is gratitude and privilege, is it one of the same thing, or are we looking at something different?
So it's interesting. I have not thought about this gratitude, where gratitude fits in. And I don't think you need to have gratitude to respect the privileges that you have. I think that it is a natural reaction to say that I'm grateful for these things. But I could see that there might be instances where somebody may not be grateful for or not feel overly like grateful for a thing. But it doesn't matter whether you feel grateful or not. It matters if it exists in your life or not. I'm not going to presume that you value the same things that I value. But if you're a hair if like you if I have locks and I have dreadlocks and that's what I have in my head, then that's what I have in my head. Like that's the thing, that whether or not I want to say that that's I'm grateful for that or not, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that it exists in your life, and you're willing to acknowledge that, and you're willing to say, because I have it, then there's something that I should do with it. My hope, I guess, is that the long term effects is that there's an implication of gratitude, that you will be grateful for the things that you have. I just don't think that everyone's going to start from that place. I think that takes a lot of time and a lot of reflection, a lot of mindfulness, and a lot of like, what am I truly grateful for? Not everybody can ask that question for themselves. What am I grateful for? People go through day to days and they're struggling, and it's like, I need to get from point A to point B. I get you. I understand that. I respect that. I'm not asking you to do a whole lot. Just acknowledge the things that you got, and then eventually, maybe you might be grateful for them.
Yeah, I like that. There's a practicality there, isn't there? That, it's very quick to get to privilege, isn't it? I want to go much deeper into kind of the possibilities, obviously, of privilege, because it's a great starting point, but it is about reflection, isn't it? It's about starting with something, looking around you at your world, the people, the place where you are. And I loved the moment where you said it doesn't have to be $1 billion. It can be something so profoundly simple as connection with others. You might be privileged that you have a very small, could be very, very small network of people around you who you can trust, who you love, and they love you back. That it's a very practical thing, isn't it? That I think a lot of us are missing right now.
It is the idea is for it to be practical, and the idea is to recognize the simple things. Um, the One of the things that in the exploration of this topic was just how impactful my own father was on my is in my life, has been on my life. Like growing up, me and him have had a lot have had conflict of just because I'm growing up an adolescent. My dad wants to make sure that I'm a successful person as well, and I realized that in writing more about this possibilities of privilege, that is an aspect that a lot of people don't have, and it took me time to see it. It took me time to recognize it. It wasn't until I kept writing and writing and writing and writing and writing that I was like, my dad and my relationship, that thing is so fundamental. And I have missed that for quite some time. And when I keep talking to friends and they don't have that thing, they don't have that relationship, or I speak to folks who are like, I wish I would have had that. And then it's just like, okay, I have something that other folks don't have. What does that mean for me? What extra thing can I express into the world or give to the world as a result of that? Now I incorporate more of those stories into the speeches that I give. Now, when I'm working with youth, I'm more sensitive to the topic of being like how parents and the relationships engage in that space. Um, there's an organization called Big Brothers Big Sisters here in the United States, and it's to help guide, and it's to help mentor, it's to help be a resource for youth. And the meaning of being in those spaces, I stopped going in this space for a little while just because I got busy. But through my exploration, is like I need to get back into that space. I have something to offer to other folks, and so it can be something small, and even in these small things, really large things emerge, and from there, it's like I then have I personally feel as though I now have a responsibility to share that with others. So that's where that comes from. Something small turns into something big, turns into responsibility.
Yeah, so I want to come on to the what I can then offer up as a result of identifying privilege in a minute, because I think that's a really interesting one, because then that's this sort of spin-off benefit of working with privilege. And I want to go deeper into that because that's, to me, I think really important as we kind of hopefully co-create a better kind of world going forward. But just in terms of just a few steps backwards then, how did you
Yeah.
realize, as Jason Browne, how did you realize this was a thing? Was there a moment in time where you thought, hold on a minute, I've been missing something here? Was there a key kind of point in your world, in your life?
So I would say that there's a couple points in my life. Growing up, I knew there have been moments in life in which I recognized that I had things that other people did not, and I think that it starts there. Like you're in a space, you're like, oh, everyone has this thing. It could be like everyone has coffee in the morning, or everyone has, brown socks. And then one day you realize that's not true. Like my world is greater. Things are different. Things are different what I have, and there's an assessment of whether or not that's has less value or more value, or how much it means to you. And like you have this value structure that you then create once you see that difference. And so there's two moments for me that really solidify this for me. And after this, I'm going to ask you a moment where you had this happen. So I'm setting you up. I'm setting you up. I'm tossing it back to you of like when you saw the difference. Two times. One time was when I went to travel to India. I got invited to go to India to give a talk. and I decided to travel by myself for like 2 weeks. I had no idea where I was going, what I was doing. I just decided, hey, I'm going to push myself out of my comfort zone, and I'm just going to frolic, as they say in India. I'm going to bounce around to different parts of it and just figure it out. And I did, and I realized very quickly that I was I thought I could go into any space and be like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm cool with everything that's around me. I'm so worldly. I can do all these things, and I'm Jason Brown. La 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 la." And then I got to India, and I was like, "I am uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable like in a sense of like I feel unsafe or anything like that. It's like I feel uncomfortable in the sense of all the things that have built my life up were not around me, and this culture shock of seeing such that the difference that I mentioned earlier, this I have this, you have that, and there is a difference there. Not a good, not a bad, just a difference. And I recognized that I all these things that I have that are different have value, just like all the things that they do have value. And I began to like enumerate them. I was like, I have this, I have this, I have this. I have one, I have number 5,722, I have this. Number 9,201, I have that. And so I started like cataloging all of these things, and I began to realize like there's a beauty in that, and how often I don't act like do anything with that. And there's a disservice with that. So that was one time. The second time was when I in the United States there's Native Americans who were here before Europeans came over, and those are the folks who got pushed out of their land, and that happens in a number of spaces around the world. In Australia, New Zealand, there's groups that were there, and then other people came in, and so I realized at one point that a lot of Native Americans live on Native American reservations, which is like pockets of land that the government says, here, you can have this land and you can do what you want with it. You don't have to pay taxes. Like the government trying to make up for like the fact that they took the land, but not really. Anyway, so there's a number of reservations around the country in the United States. And I realized I've never been to one as an American. Not We talk about them in school. We name our sports teams after the cultures. We have many towns and states named after the culture, but we don't ask our students, ask our kids, ask our adults to go immerse themselves in the culture like I did in India and see the differences. Not to say one's better than the other, just understand the differences. And I traveled to it was regarding a talk, like I gave a speech, and then I was like, I'm going to drive around and speak to people, and I did, and not for as long as I did in India, but it was so humbling to hear what life is like on the opposite side, right next door to where I am, but I had no idea. And the value system that they have, the things that they cherish, were similar to the things that I had cherished, but they were different. And how even using the things that I've been given in my life, the privileges that I have to invoke a conversation and seek a deeper understanding with another person, another group of people. Even that simple act was just like, there's so much here, and we find so many reasons to not do those simple things. I got really frustrated in the fact that most of my life was spent not wanting to engage a group of people. And I was like, this needs to happen more. Just like with the Big Brothers Big Sisters things. I was like, I need to visit more folks around the United States and Native reservations. Now next time I'm going to Australia, I'm going to reach, I have a few contacts. I'm going to learn about the Aboriginal culture in Australia. I want to learn those particular groups of people. When I go to another location, if there are dynamics between groups of folks, I want to learn that. I want to have those conversations. I have the privilege of doing so. So why not do that and begin to make bridges where bridges were not there before? So that's where that comes from. Those were two instances. So Neil, was there an instance I've been talking for a long time. Was there an instance where you had kind of that revelation for yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. Very, very different to yours, Jason. I think for me, the first time I realized it was not me realizing it was somebody else. Where I realized actually that I had the privilege of actually being I mean, not at winning any Olympic medals anytime soon, but that I was pretty good at sports, sports in very, plural sense. Actually quite natural, but it was one guy or kid at school, actually, a chap called Barry Hellier, who, if he's ever listening to this, Barry, yes, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because he basically selected me. You know, when the two team captains select the people they want in their team, and it's you, and it's you, and it's you, and it's you. I had never been picked anything but last before, and Barry Hellier picked me first. I was standing there thinking, hold on, this must be in reverse order. It's some kind of mistake. And he said, no, 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 I want you, Neil, on my team. I was like, okay. And this was to play with soccer. It was just a soccer. It was a sports lesson in school. And that was, for me, one of the most life-changing moments that I've ever had. I had the privilege of being selected first for the first time in my life. And I realized, actually, I can do this. It flipped a switch, and it just opened up this world of sports for me, which has been, both a physicality and a mental thing and a well-being thing for the whole of my life. It was just a moment where I felt I'm so privileged to actually be innately very, very healthy, innately very fit. Just it's in the DNA. I don't have to work hard at it, and I'm good at sports. So that was a real privilege moment that was shared from something external that happened to me. And it was just that moment of realization, which was, as I say, profound. I would not be here sat talking to you, Jason, if it was not for that moment. I don't know where I'd be. I don't know what I'd be doing, but I'm a different person on the other side of that moment. So that was fascinating.
And it's in that exchange that's the beautiful thing. So one, you had the privilege of having natural talent. You had the privilege of being fit. Not only did you have the privilege of being chosen first, the person who was making the choice, you said his name is Barry.
Mm.
Barry Barry had the privilege of making those choices and chose to use that privilege to highlight you in that moment, which speaks to like, okay, what choice, what times in my life do I get to choose people? Like you chose me to be on this podcast. Like that's a choice you're making to say, I'm putting you on my team. It makes me think of like next time I'm putting people on my team, who am I going to put on there? And it's so simple. It's so simple and we take for granted like this those moments, those pivotal the simple moments that we think that could be pivotal moments for other people. And that's all of these intricacies and how they intersect are like the possibilities of privilege, my dude. It's like there's so many cool things in that space. And I'm
Mm.
glad that we got to hang out and you got to be selected in soccer. I'm terrible at soccer, Neil. I am terrible at football. You do not want me on your team. I do not want to be picked first. Do not pick me on your team. Say, Jason, why don't you go grab everybody some water and we'll hang out. We'll play the game while you go grab some water for everybody else. I'm bad,
But
Neil.
but
Don't
is
choose me.
but isn't that the wonderful thing? Is that every team needs water? See, this is the point, isn't it? That you might not be there scoring the goal or the touchdown, but every team needs water. You're the man. I
It's
mean, it's
true.
so good. Yeah.
That is very true. Every team does need water, which is a privilege to have drinkable water that I can grab and drink. Sure. I mean, I never identified as the water boy responsibility on a team. But hey, listen, if that's what I need to do for the squad for the team, okay, I got you. I'll be the water boy for the soccer team.
Mm. So there's a real externality. I think that is a word, but there's an
Sure.
externality here about privilege, isn't there? Because is it almost one of those things, do you think, that you can't exist in isolation? So you can only be privileged or feel privileged if you are able to compare to something external? Or is this something that is deeper that actually comes from within? You can sense privilege, you can sense something, but it is just exclusively within you, almost to the point where you don't have to share it, you don't have to do that comparison. Or is privilege always comparative?
I think this is a good This is a really good question, and I gravitate towards this relationship with others because I feel like that's the ultimate end goal of this whole conversation of how this impacts other how this can impact other people. Um, like let's use an example. Like if I have to answer, let me answer your question first, and let me dive into this. I think this can be individual, and I think this can be relational. I think they can be both. The idea of going back to water, drinkable, clean. I can go to a faucet, turn on a faucet. Maybe I want to filter it, but like I can turn on a faucet, put a cup under it, and drink that water, and it's easy. I don't have to walk 10 miles to get it. I'm not walking through floods. I'm not walking through all these things that a lot of people around the world have to do it, and I don't have to worry about, I don't know, getting infected with whatever. Like that happens. That the privilege of having that can impact like your family, can impact your friends, or the privilege of not having that can impact your family and your friends. But I could understand how that acknowledgement of just I have access to clean water could just be a thing that is internal, that is not necessarily shared with other people. There's not a lot that you can do with it, but it is a thing that's like I don't have to take 2 hours out of my day to find clean water. How much more valuable are the hours that I have now in my day, now that I'm recognizing that, a good 1/8 of the world has to do that. 1 billion people have to go out of their way, if not more, for clean water. Okay. I don't. What does that mean for me? I don't know what that means for you. For me, that means that every single moment that I'm doing something is a little bit more valuable to me now. That has nothing to do with anybody else. Let's take another example. If you have access uh, to driving a car, you could say that you earned it, or maybe you got it from your parents, and so you're like, whether I earned it or not is not important. You have the privilege of being able to transport yourself or other people from point A to point B. Now we can start to talk about how that not only impacts you, but it impacts other people. I can swing by your house, Neil, and be like, "Hey, Neil, let's go to the pub." Okay, cool. Well, okay, maybe not the pub because you shouldn't be driving and drinking. Well, let's go to the park. Let's play some soccer, right? Like that's what we choose to do when we hop in the car. Maybe you need to go to the grocery store, Neil, and you've been taking the bus or public transportation for the past year, and like you're having a stressful day. No, Neil, I got you. I'll swing by. We'll just go to the store. We'll go play soccer afterwards, maybe. But like, I got you. I'll help you out. There's an opportunity with that particular privilege, and it's easier to associate this connection with that privilege. However, there is, no matter what the privileges are, no matter what you're grateful for, no matter what you have, it can, and I hope it does come back to the individual, that reflection state of saying, what does this mean for me? And what values now do I have as a result of it? I think it does come back to that.
So the values piece then, that feels important in this kind of measurement of the privilege and the kind of the rating of them, what I'm going to do with it. We'll come on to what we're going to do with the privilege in a minute. But if you have certain values, one privilege could look very different to you versus to me because we have different values. Or it could be
Yes.
that we are on a different kind of life trajectory, or we have different expectations, or so it could be the same privilege, and we're actually blessed with that same thing, but the way we interpret it could be fundamentally different, couldn't it? Which then will have a knock-on effect as to then how we could use it, would it?
100%. And that's the reason why in the very beginning you said, you have to be grateful for it? I don't know. I mean, I hope so. You interpret it however you need to interpret it. You process it however Neil processes it. It just because I have brown socks and you have brown socks, you might think that, you know what, brown socks, I hate brown socks. I don't really care. Me, it's like I didn't grow up with socks, and I always had to just wear my feet in my shoes. And now that I have socks, it means so much more to me. That we are going to interpret those two things very, very, very differently in that particular example. And the meaning means two separate things. I think the beauty, there's a beauty of the possible exchange of that information. And that goes back to the revelations that I had in India and with in Native American reservations. Is like once you're aware of that privilege existing, even if it seems trivial to you, like okay, I have the thing, okay, whatever. Uh, that is an area of exploration with other folks, which gives you a chance to learn and gain even more perspective. If I never had socks until I was 22 years old, I I don't know where that example came from, but if I met someone who told me that, I'd be like, wow, I my perception now of socks has changed. And maybe when I'm if I'm donating clothes to something, it's like I need to make sure there's socks in there. Like that small little shift, but there's a shift. And that it comes from that exchange of being seeming trivial, being willing to have a conversation about even the most trivial things and seeing what results of that piece, because there could be a lot of value there.
So, I mean, you and I, Jason, we're positive people. We're looking at the upside in this topic, and we're kind of exploring stuff. And we will get on to the bit about what you can do with it in a minute. Promise you, we
Yeah, sure.
need to go there. But in the meantime, as we progress towards that, I'm kind of I'm conscious that not everybody has the same positive outlook on life and
Mm.
potentially could be listening to this and thinking, yeah, well, it's okay for you two guys because you have privilege. You're blessed with this, you've worked for this, you've got that. And I could put a big list of things that Neil and Jason have got that I haven't got. So now I'm not looking at you in a positive way because I'm now feeling like, oh, well, it's okay for you saying all of this, but what about me? And almost coming at it from a not positive perspective, but actually looking at it as I'm going to use jealousy, envy, a lot of words that are really uncomfortable. But there's a danger here, isn't there, that this opens up some potential old wounds or some things that people don't necessarily have sitting comfortably in their world. I'm not talking about everybody, but there will be people who will not enjoy this topic, aren't there?
Yes, there are, and I think the main reason why, I'm sure there's a million reasons, is that there's a tendency to focus on the opposite side of privilege. So, my position, my TEDx talk, my upcoming book, all that stuff is like all the things that I'm doing in this space is asking people to look at the privileges they have, especially those that have gone through a lot. Maybe they're just be simple, like they're having a bad day or a bad year or a bad decade. The tendency is to look at all the privileges that you don't have. And I think that there's a very easy spiral that can happen if you begin to analyze the privileges that you don't have. Because it's like, well, I don't have this, which means I don't have this, which means I don't have this. Just, it's easier to to compare, like you said, look at somebody else and compare, and then think about what you don't have. I think that's the easy approach. And for many, that's maybe the natural approach. It might feel uncomfortable and maybe even unfair to think about the privileges that you have if you're in a less than ideal situation, in a bad situation, in that bad year, that bad decade of the bad day of your life. And I'm still suggesting that you look at the privileges that you have. It's a barrier to get over. The barrier is I want to analyze and hold on to the things that I don't have, as opposed to holding on and finding the things that you do. And I firmly, and I'm not trying to discredit, and this is really important. This is not to discredit the things that you don't have. This is not to minimize the struggles that people go through. This is not to minimize the pieces of your life that are freaking tough. That's not what this is about. What this is about is to say, yes, all of that can be true. And and there is someone else in the world that does not have a piece of your life that is good, that is beneficial to you, that could be helpful to you. And there is a beauty in that space if you're willing to go into that space. I'm not suggesting that this is a super easy thing for everyone to do, but I do think it is a thing that can be beneficial if you're able to even dip into that territory. So I love this question, and it's a really important distinction. And there might be someone who's listening to this podcast or leaves a comment like, this is not for me. Cool, no problem, no problem. I'll ask you one thing. Next time you go, if you have access to something like clean water, next time you go to get a drink from the faucet, just consider that might be a privilege. And what does that mean to you? That's it. What does that mean to you? Just start there. And if it means nothing, cool. You can forget about this podcast. Don't forget about Neil. Come back so you can tell all your friends to subscribe to Neil's podcast. But like me, Jason Browne, you can be like, forget Jason. But maybe, just maybe, that begins to open the door of like, okay, if I have access to clean water, all right, well, I have this one friend that does love me very much and has supported me. I have this one time somebody picked me on a soccer team. Okay, what does that mean? And maybe this might be a 10-year process for those 3 questions. Okay, cool. Then I'm glad that we had this conversation and you're beginning to dig into it. Doesn't have to be a big revelation. It can be very small.
And that's key, isn't it? This whole idea of non-judgment, because I think what you're saying, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm sure you will. But the point is that judgment, as soon as we start judging, as soon as we start interpreting or justifying or trying to talk ourselves out of it or going down that kind of negative pathway, it's not lost, but it's very disconcerting. Whereas if we keep it super simple and just answer the question that you've just asked without judgment, without expectation, without as little comparison with others as possible, then it keeps it very pure and simple, doesn't it? Because the more pure and simple this conversation, the easier it is for it to become relevant and embedded in our life. And then we can do something with it. Is it the simplicity that we're really after here?
I do think it's simplicity. I think it is the simplicity, but I love this non-judgmental aspect that you brought up. I had not considered that. Is this in the evaluation of privileges that exist in your life? It's difficult to do this, but there's no judgment in however you assess what you have. I don't. I've considered this idea. I've not placed that label of like non-judgment, and I love this. It's this. You can explore this, and you can come up with whatever answer you like, and that is okay. There's no judgment from me. I'll give you an example, and I didn't use this word, and I love this word. Neil, thank you very much. There was at a conference I was speaking about this, sharing this perspective, and I had a workshop. And one of the main things that I have, let me shut my door. Can you hear that? Oh, okay.
No, it's all good.
Okay. One of the main things that I distinguish when it comes to privilege is this idea of it doesn't matter whether you feel like you've earned your privilege or whether you've not. It doesn't matter. If you have it, you have it, and that's the privilege. But I emphasize folks to not get too caught up on whether you earned it or not. And there's no judgment if you choose it to be earned or unearned. For instance, if you think that the job that you have, you've earned it wholeheartedly. Like you work super hard, you got it. Cool. If your parents were the owners of that company and you still got the job, someone could look at that and be like, you didn't earn that. Your parents gave you that job. I don't care. Me personally, the person who's sharing this idea, I personally don't care whether or not you identify with the idea that you earned it or you didn't earn it. I just want you to recognize it as a privilege. And there's no, and that one choice, there's no judgment in it. When in my workshop, somebody was like, gave me an example like that. And I was like, awesome. And then somebody else was like, isn't that different? And I was like, I don't care if it's different. We acknowledged it. That is a huge step. Moving on. And like, in that moment, I did not judge the assessment. Here's a clear way of saying this, Neil. I don't judge the evaluation or the assessment of a privilege. I just want you to acknowledge that it exists and then work from there. If you can acknowledge it, that's the one thing I'm asking you to do. Just acknowledge it. After that, see where it goes. I love that.
I love that too. That's a real pure way of looking at this, and I think for a lot of people that will take the potential complexity, because a lot of us we kind of talk ourselves out of doing these things. We know it's a good thing. We're hearing the story here. We're sort of listening to Jason's advice. We think, yeah, that's great, but, and then the but will come in, and but I haven't got time, but I haven't got the inclination today, but I'll do it tomorrow, and we never get around to doing it. So I think that simplicity and that clarity of it's okay, just acknowledge it, is that first step, isn't it? Because without the first step, you're never going to do this at all. So the first step is always the key one. It's a cliche, but it's so true here. It really is, isn't it?
And I think that gets to your point of simplicity. The acknowledgement, non-judgment, the non-judgment acknowledgement is the first simple step. And I mean, there's a lot that's said in a lot of other spaces too, but it's so true. It's so there's assess it however. If this means whatever it means to you, that's fine. Let's just talk about it, see what happens. I love that, Neil.
So what are we going to do with this then, Jason? Once we've uncovered the privilege that we have, we've kind of recognized it, we've acknowledged it, and we think, okay, yeah, I've got a list, and actually on my list of 1,000 things, I'm going to actually prioritize these 3 at the top of my list, because these seem to be the ones that just keep talking at me. They keep looking at me and I can't avoid them. These are the 3 main privileges that I've identified. I don't know, maybe it would look like that. Maybe I'm just talking from my own perspective here, but let's say I've got 3, okay? And it isn't the sports one, they're more kind of recent things. And I think, right, these are my 3 privileges, the top 3. What do I then do with those? Because it's all very well me sat there thinking, yeah, I'm privileged. I need to be able to kind of do an output. You said at the beginning, there's something then I can give as a result of knowing those things. Where do I then kind of go with them? If I've written them down or I've acknowledged that these are my 3, and I'll just say 3 just to keep it simple, because I think beyond 3, it starts to get, well, this is a lifetime's work and people then start switching off again. So let's keep it just 3. Where do I go next? What do I then do?
All right, so I'm gonna answer this question with a question. Neil, what is 1 on your list? What's 1 privilege on your personal list?
So I have the privilege of practicing a skill that I have, innate skill of active listening. So I'm doing it right now. So I have no pre-planned questions to ask you. I'm here actively listening to your answers and then going with another question based on the answer you give to the previous question. So that's, to me, that's a privilege to be able to work with somebody like you and the other guests that I have to uncover little nuggets of gold. That is an absolute privilege on behalf of other people. Having a podcast in that way is such a privilege.
So let's just play around with this idea of your ability. There's an ability there. There's also a skill, if you want to consider it a skill. You've already taken the step to create this environment. Like if you did not have a forum that allowed you to leverage that skill that other people may not have, then I'd be like, well, what is one area? How are you using that outside of yourself? Are you using that to amplify anyone else's? Are you using that to help out anybody who does not have that skill? I think that's the very simple way. I have this, somebody else might not. How can I share this thing with another person? There's a few, like there's some frameworks that I've created, but like that's the simple thing. And you're doing that. You're creating a space. You're literally, this conversation is infinitely unique, not only because it is, but also because I have not had many other people ask me similar questions related to privilege, this topic, like you have. You are an exceptional listener. You are an exceptional. Uh, you're really good at crafting questions as it relates to your niche, and you do that very, very, very well. Um, and to that point, I recognize this, and I hope your listeners recognize this too. And I hope that you continue to do using this for other people is to continue to find ways of amplifying the things that you value, whatever that is, through this skill to help others. Amplifying what you value through this skill to help somebody else. It could be one person, it could be 100, it could be 1,000,000. If you're in the middle of, if you get to hop onto the news and they're like, Neil, what do you think about blah 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 blah, and you've been like actively listening to the entire conversation, and you're able to drop a couple nuggets that everyone else can't, and maybe you're bringing other people to the conversation. You're like, you know what, I need to, maybe this is a time that you use to pull somebody onto your team and be like, you know what, I think this is an opportunity where we actually need to reach out to Dr. So-and-so, because they're the folks that are able to do this after listening to a couple things that he has to say. You're actively listening, and you're using your position to bring people into the fold that otherwise would not be heard. And that, to me, is the beginning of creating a space where you're helping others through the privileges that you have. So the short answer is thinking about the things you value, using your skill, using your ability, then to amplify other folks in that space, or give them a piece of that skill that they don't naturally have. And you're doing it, and I love the fact that you have found that, because not everybody has.
This feels like, I guess, for all of us, and I'm sure as well you and sort of Jason, as you kind of travel through life, it feels like it is an ongoing journey. This isn't a one-time activity that you do it. It's like, yeah, I watched Jason's TED talk, and yeah, I kind of listened. I did my list, and yeah, okay, that's done. On to the next thing. This feels like once you open this up, it almost just by definition has to be there forever. It's almost that it's too delicious, actually, in terms of like a taste that it gives you, isn't it? Because once you open it up, it is lovely. I mean, it's because it is a privilege to have the privileges. It's almost like in its most natural sense, it is the most amazing thing. So you wouldn't want to kind of give it up. It is a lifelong thing, isn't it?
It is very much a lifelong thing, and that can be intimidating. That could be like, I don't, you can dip into this and be like, oh, this whole world is daunting. There's so many levels to this, and it feels daunting. And again, you can open the door, grab one thing out. You can go into your kitchen, open up your cupboard, and then grab one thing out and be like, shut the cupboard, leave it closed, and just, use that one thing for a while. And then you can see how that feels, and you can play around with it, whatever that thing is, the ability to actively listen. All right, cool. And you can put it in your pocket, and then when you're ready, go back to the cupboard, open it back up. Maybe you grab something smaller, shut it back, and you keep. And it's fun to do that. You may feel like, and maybe you stop there for a while, and that's the beautiful part, Neil, is like, yes, it is delicious. It is fun. It can be, but I could also see it being overwhelming. I could see it also being intimidating. I can see it being just like any other aspect of self improvement, self development, self reflection, all of these aspects. I can see it being one other thing on a list. I hope that it's not, but I can see that. But the fact that this is so non-judgmental, I hope that it comes back to that. It's like, however you view it. This whole water conversation of being in India, I have a hard time going to grab a glass of water and not having crossed my mind, Jason, this is super easy for you. I don't know what that means to me. I don't know how that impacts my life on a regular basis aside from that, but I know that it does. The fact that every single time I take a sip out of a cup, not maybe not every time I take a sip out of a cup, but every time I'm like actively having to walk to go grab water, it crosses my mind. A billion people cannot do this. Eventually, my brain will make some sort of connection that's like, okay, why don't you do this today as a result of it? And that is the delicious part. It makes you feel good too. It makes you feel good. So I recognize the deliciousness. I also recognize that it might take a whole long time to prepare the meal. So it might be a little daunting, and that's okay.
Mm. So we've got a TED talk, haven't we? We've got a TEDx talk where you explore all of this, and it is quite exquisite. Everybody listening, you really must. And we will put into the description of this conversation in the notes below. We will put the link to Jason's talk, because it really is exquisite, and you are such an incredible storyteller. When people listen to this, I think, oh wow, if only I could tell stories like that. It is such high quality. And I'm expecting and guessing the book will be something similar. It's going to be a quality piece, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about that.
I am so excited for that. I am. It's still coming together. We're about to. Hopefully, we'll land like a solid publisher and all of this stuff. Like it'll be a little while before it comes out, but there's a lot of storytelling involved. And thank you for the compliment, by the way. There's a lot of storytelling involved. There's a lot of pieces involved. A lot of practical applications of some of the things you said. Like, okay, I have my list of 3. How do I take this list and make it into something in reality in a day-to-day sense of breaking it down? The book does that, and I'm. If this is the one thing that I can share with one other person in this world, and they take something from it and they do something with it, then that's all I really want. My hope is that the book, the talk, just gets people to talk about these things that they're afraid to talk about. And hopefully the stories that I tell along the way are convincing enough or familiar enough or connecting enough where you're like, oh, yeah, I get it. That's pretty simple. I can, let's dive into it. Let's come up with my list of 3. Let's play around and see what happens if I do something with that today. Like it's that carefree, non-judgmental, fun aspect of it. I believe that that's there in the book. So the book will be a tool, but it will also be an exploration of a little bit about me, and you get to hear some of the stories of my father, of his travels around the Native American reservations in India. You get to hear about pieces of my childhood and how all of these things add up to, just like for you, Neil, to all the listeners, it's like all of our experiences give us these privileges, and there's so much there. There's so much interesting stuff there, and even if life has dealt you a number of cards that don't feel so great, there are a lot of beautiful things on the opposite side, and I think this book captures that. I hope this book captures that, and I just hope that it helps us continue the conversation. If we can just keep talking and sharing these moments, man, I'm good.
Jason, it's been an absolute privilege, literally, without clichéing this, to be talking to you today. And I really appreciate your guidance and your wisdom. You've clearly gone so deep into this topic, like no other. I have to say, no other person I've encountered who's really kind of identified this as being such a powerful thing. So I wish you all the very best with the book when that comes out. And in the meantime, we will be pointing and directing many people towards your talk. So if you haven't listened or watched it, you must. Be the very next thing you do today, because it's going to give you a profound, different way of looking at life. It really is. So Jason, thank you again.
Thank you very much, Neil. It has been indeed a pleasure to hang out with you, and a privilege.